On a Tuesday, I was in the kitchen, trying to coax our 5-year-old son Noah into eating a carrot stick. My husband Mark was at the dining table, laptop open, finishing up a work proposal. We were a picture of domestic tranquility, the kind of peace we had worked relentlessly for over a decade to achieve. The phone buzzed, displaying a number I recognized as my late father's estate lawyer, Mr. Harrison. My heart did a familiar, painful little squeeze. It had only been 6 weeks since we'd lost Dad to a swift and brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. The grief was still a raw, open wound, a constant ache just beneath the surface of my daily life. "Hello, Clara." Mr. Harrison's voice was gentle, professional. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, not at all," I said, moving to the living room for privacy. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is proceeding as expected with the will. Your father was very organized. However, there is one item I need to discuss with you, a significant one. It's regarding his 401k retirement account." I nodded. Even though he couldn't see me, Dad had always been meticulous about his finances. He was a man who believed in providing, in leaving a legacy of security. He told me countless times, especially after my mother passed away and he remarried, that his retirement savings were his way of ensuring I was always taken care of. "Your stepmother Brenda has the house and her own savings," he'd say, patting my hand. "The 401k is for you, kiddo. It's your safety net." It was a substantial amount, the result of 40 years of diligent work as a civil engineer. It was the money Mark and I had earmarked for Noah's college fund, a future we could give him that was free of the crushing student debt we'd both endured. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "Well, Clara," Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a sound I would later recognize as the prelude to a storm. "It appears the beneficiary designation on the account was changed shortly before your father passed. The sole beneficiary is now listed as your half-brother Leo." The world went silent. The sounds of the house, Noah's giggles, Mark's typing, the hum of the refrigerator faded into a dull roar in my ears. I must have misheard. "I'm sorry," I stammered, sinking onto the arm of the sofa. "Can you repeat that?" "The beneficiary was changed. The paperwork was filed 3 weeks before your father's death. It's all legally in order, signed and dated. The entire balance of the account will be dispersed to Leo." 3 weeks before he died, the words echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up in my chest. 3 weeks ago, Dad was barely lucid. He was a ghost of himself, tethered to the earth by a web of tubes and a constant morphine drip. He couldn't hold a pen steady, let alone comprehend a complex financial document. He was confused, weak, and in constant pain. The man who signed that form was not the father I knew. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. And then, a single, clear image surfaced. My stepmother, Brenda, sitting by his bedside, her hand holding his, guiding a pen across a document she'd shielded from my view. "Just some hospital forms, honey," she'd said with a tight, saccharine smile when I'd walked in. "You know how much paperwork there is." At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. I was exhausted, consumed by the anticipatory grief of watching my hero fade away. I trusted her. She was his wife. Why wouldn't I? Now that memory felt sinister, coated in a layer of deceit so thick it made me nauseous. "Clara, are you still there?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice laced with concern. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Yes, I'm here. Thank you for letting me know." I hung up the phone and stood there, frozen. The carefully built tower of my life was swaying. Mark found me minutes later, my face pale, the phone still clutched in my hand. "Clara? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just handed him the phone and pointed to Mr. Harrison's number. He listened as I recounted the conversation, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a cold, hard anger that mirrored my own. "That's impossible," he said, his voice low and firm. "Your dad would never do that. He was so proud of that fund, of leaving it to you." "She did it, Mark." I finally choked out, the words tasting like poison. "Brenda, she must have made him sign it. He wasn't in his right mind." Mark wrapped his arms around me, a solid, grounding force in my spinning world. "Okay," he said, his voice a rock. "Okay, we'll figure this out. The first step is to talk to her. Maybe it's a mistake, a misunderstanding." Oh, how I wish it had been. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the landscape of my family. My mom passed away from breast cancer when I was 16. A year later, my dad, lonely and lost, met Brenda. She was a widow with a son, Leo, who was a few years younger than me. On the surface, she was perfect. Charming, attentive, and she seemed to make my father happy again. I wanted that for him, so I welcomed her. But there was always an undercurrent, a subtle poison she dripped into our family dynamic. Brenda was a master of manipulation, playing the part of the doting wife while quietly isolating Dad from his old friends, and even, to a degree, from me. Everything became about her needs, her comfort, and most importantly, her son. Leo was, and is, the quintessential golden child. While I was working my way through college, juggling 2 jobs and graduating with honors, Leo was failing out of his 3rd community college program, funded by Brenda's late husband's insurance policy. While Mark and I were saving every penny, living in a cramped apartment to scrape together a down payment for our home, Leo was leasing a new BMW he couldn't afford and trying to launch a career as a lifestyle influencer. Brenda never saw his failures. She saw unrealized potential, She saw a creative spirit too special for the mundane world. My father, bless his heart, tried to be a good stepfather. He paid off Leo's credit card debt more times than I can count, always after a tearful, closed-door meeting with Brenda. He just needs a little help to get on his feet, Clara, Dad would tell me, a weary look in his eyes. Dad, his feet have never touched the ground, I'd argue. She's enabling him. The conversation always ended the same way. A sigh, a sad smile. Just let it be, kiddo. It's for the best. He loved Brenda, and keeping the peace with her was his priority. I understood, but it still stung. It stung when they used the money Dad had saved for my wedding to fund one of Leo's disastrous business ventures, a gourmet dog biscuit delivery service. It stung when my accomplishments were met with polite nods, while Leo's every minor achievement was celebrated with lavish dinners. The worst part was the narrative Brenda spun. I was the practical one, the responsible one, which in her language was code for boring, materialistic, and selfish. I had a husband, a good job, a child. I didn't need anything. Leo, on the other hand, was the sensitive artist, the one who felt things deeply. He needed their support. It was a classic narcissist enabler dynamic, and my dad was caught in the middle. Despite all this, Dad and I remained close. We had our weekly phone calls, our inside jokes, the shared grief for my mom that bound us together. He was my rock. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that he would never, ever consciously cut me out of his legacy. That 401k wasn't just money, it was his final I love you, his last act of taking care of his little girl. And Brenda had stolen it. Armed with a misplaced sense of optimism, I called Brenda the next day. I decided to approach it calmly, to give her the benefit of the doubt, as Mark had suggested. Hi, Brenda, I said, my voice impressively even. Mr. Harrison called me yesterday about Dad's 401k. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. It was a heavy, loaded silence. Oh, she said, her voice a little too bright. Yes, the lawyers are handling everything. It's all so complicated, isn't it? He told me the beneficiary was changed to Leo. I kept my tone neutral, a simple statement of fact. That's right, she said, the brightness unwavering. Your father and I discussed it. It's what he wanted. My carefully constructed composure began to crack. What he wanted? Brenda, 3 weeks before he died, he could barely recognize me. He thought I was my mother. How could he possibly have made a decision like that? Her voice hardened, the fake sympathy evaporating like mist on a hot day. Now, you listen to me, Clara. Your father was perfectly lucid when it mattered. He was worried about Leo. You're settled. You have Mark, a house, a stable life. Leo is struggling. He's a sensitive boy. Your father knew he needed the help more than you did. It was his final wish to make sure Leo was secure. The audacity of it stole my breath. She was using my stability, the very thing I had worked my entire adult life for, as a weapon against me. She was twisting my father's love and concern into a justification for theft. That's a lie, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Dad told me, dozens of times, that money was for me. For Noah. You took advantage of him when he was sick and helpless. You made him sign that paper. How dare you, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. How dare you accuse me of such a thing after everything I did for your father? I was the one there with him, day in and day out. While you were off living your perfect little life, you have no idea what it was like. I was there every single day after work, Brenda. I spent nights at the hospital. Don't you dare try to paint me as an absent daughter. A visit is not the same as being a wife, she spat. You have no right to question his decisions, or mine. The dam broke. The grief, the anger, the years of suppressed resentment came pouring out. This isn't over, Brenda. I'm not going to let you steal my father's last gift to me. I will fight this. And that's when she dropped the bomb. Her tone shifted again, becoming cold, clinical, and terrifyingly calm. You need to be very, very careful, Clara. If you continue to make these baseless accusations, if you try to cause trouble for me or for my son, I will not hesitate to take legal action. I will sue you for harassment. You are harassing a grieving widow. Think about how that will look to a judge. I was stunned into silence. Harassment? I was the one who had been wronged, whose inheritance had been stolen, and she was threatening me? It was a move of such breathtaking, manipulative genius that I almost had to admire it. She wasn't just defending her actions. She was going on the offensive, preemptively painting me as the aggressor. This conversation is over, she said, her voice dripping with finality. Do not contact me again unless it's through a lawyer. And I suggest you think long and hard before you do. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, the phone clattering from my numb fingers onto the counter. The war had begun. And I had just been told that if I dared to fight back, I would be the one accused of war crimes. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and frantic, whispered conversations with Mark after Noah was in bed. Brenda's threat hung over us like a guillotine. Could she actually sue me for harassment? Could challenging the beneficiary change be twisted into an attack on a grieving widow? The sheer injustice of it made me sick. We need a lawyer, Mark said, his face set in grim lines. Not just an estate lawyer. We need someone who understands this kind of family warfare. He was right. This wasn't a simple legal dispute anymore. It was a character assassination in the making. We found a lawyer named Sarah Collins. She was sharp, empathetic, and had a no-nonsense air that I immediately trusted. We sat in her sterile, quiet office, and I laid out the whole story, from Brenda's arrival in our lives to the final, threatening phone call. I felt a profound sense of shame, as if I were airing my family's dirty laundry, but Sarah listened without judgment, her pen scratching across a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me, her expression serious. First of all, I am so sorry for your loss, and for what you're going through. This is a classic case of what we call undue influence. The burden of proof will be on us to show that your father was not of sound mind or was coerced when he signed that document. But what about her threat? I asked, my voice small. Can she really sue me for harassment? Sarah gave a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. She can try. It's a scare tactic, and a nasty one. She's trying to intimidate you into backing down. As long as our actions are confined to the legal process, filing a challenge in probate court, it cannot be considered harassment. It's your legal right. She's blowing smoke. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. So we can fight it? We can, and we should, Sarah said, her voice firming. But I need you to be prepared. These cases are ugly. They will try to paint you as a greedy, ungrateful daughter who is trying to defy her father's dying wish. They will attack your character. It will be emotionally draining and expensive. Mark reached over and took my hand. We're prepared, he said, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded, a new resolve hardening inside me. This was about more than the money. It was about my father's memory. I couldn't let Brenda's version of the story be the final word. Sarah's first step was to file a petition in probate court to contest the beneficiary change, formally freezing the disbursement of the 401k funds to Leo. The moment those papers were served to Brenda and Leo, the Cold War turned hot. The flying monkeys, as they're called in the psychology of narcissistic families, were activated. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years started calling. The message was always the same, a script clearly written by Brenda. I can't believe you're doing this to poor Brenda, one aunt clucked, her voice thick with disapproval. She just lost her husband and now she has to deal with this? Your father would be so ashamed. Leo really needs that money, Clara. A cousin I barely knew told me. He's had such a hard time. Don't you have enough? Each call was a fresh stab of betrayal. They didn't know the full story. They only knew the carefully crafted fiction Brenda was feeding them. That I, the wealthy, stable daughter, was trying to steal from my poor, struggling, artistic half-brother, all while trampling on the grave of my father and the heart of his grieving widow. We blocked their numbers, one by one. Our home, once a sanctuary, started to feel like a fortress under siege, but the worst was yet to come. Brenda wasn't content with a war of words. She was about to escalate things to a level one could never have imagined. 2 weeks after we filed the court petition, it happened. I was at the park with Noah, pushing him on the swings, trying to steal a few hours of normalcy in the midst of the chaos. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Is this Clara Evans? A woman's voice asked, professional and detached. Yes, it is. My name is Susan Miller. I'm a caseworker with Child Protective Services. My blood ran cold. I physically stumbled back from the swing set, my hand flying to my mouth. Noah, oblivious, laughed as he soared through the air. What is this about? I managed to say, my heart hammering against my ribs. We've received an anonymous report expressing concern for the welfare of your son Noah, she said, her voice maddeningly calm. The report alleges parental instability, emotional distress, and potential neglect. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the ground had fallen away beneath my feet. Neglect? Instability? I looked at my happy, healthy, laughing child. It was the most ludicrous, insane accusation imaginable. That's impossible, I whispered. Who would say that? I'm not at liberty to disclose the source of the report, Ms. Evans. However, we are obligated to investigate. I need to schedule a home visit to speak with you and your husband, and to assess the living environment for your son. We scheduled the visit for the following day, and I hung up the phone in a daze. An anonymous report. There was no doubt in my mind who was behind it. This was Brenda's nuclear option. She couldn't win on the facts of the legal case, so she was attacking the very foundation of my life, my fitness as a mother. She was trying to create a legal record of me being unstable, a narrative that her lawyers could then use in the probate case. It was a scorched earth tactic, monstrous in its cruelty. When I told Mark, his face went white with a rage so pure it was terrifying. He didn't shout. He just got very, very still. She crossed the line, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She brought our son into this. Now there are no more rules. That night, as Noah slept soundly in his bed, I sat at my computer, my hands shaking. I started digging. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to do something. I searched through old emails from my dad, looking for anything that might help. And then I found it. It was an email chain from about 6 months before he died, shortly after his diagnosis. The subject line was financial planning. It was an exchange between my dad and his closest friend, a man named George, who had been his college roommate. In the emails, my dad was clearly and lucidly laying out his plans. He wrote, George, just want to put this in writing so someone else knows my intentions. Brenda is taken care of with the house and her own investments. The 401k is for Clara. It's important to me that she gets it, no questions asked. She and Mark have worked so hard for everything they have, and I want to give Noah a head start. I'm worried about Brenda trying to pressure me to give more to Leo. She doesn't see that he's a black hole for money. I love her, but she has a blind spot a mile wide when it comes to that boy. I'm telling you this in case anything happens. In case I'm not in a position to make my own decisions later on. I printed out the emails, my hands trembling. It was a smoking gun. It was my father, in his own words, predicting exactly what Brenda would do. It was proof of his intent, written when he was of perfectly sound mind. But that wasn't all I found. As I was backing up my phone, I came across a folder of old voicemails I had saved. One was from my dad, from about a month before he died. His voice was weak, slurred from the pain medication, but the words were clear enough. Clara Bear, it's Dad. Brenda's here, with some papers. About the money. She's saying it's for Leo. I don't feel right about it. I'm so tired, kiddo. So tired. I told her it's for you. She's not listening. I love you. The message cut off. I had saved it because it was one of the last times I'd heard his voice. I hadn't understood its full significance at the time. I thought he was just confused. Now, listening to it again, it was a chilling SOS from a man under siege. He was trying to tell me what was happening. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, clutching a printout of the email in one hand and my phone in the other. These were my weapons. This was my father's voice, reaching out from beyond the grave to help me fight for him. Brenda wanted a war. Now she was going to get one. The CPS visit was the longest and most humiliating hour of my life. Susan Miller was professional, but her presence in my home felt like a violation. She inspected our pantry, looked in Noah's bedroom, and asked us a series of deeply personal questions about our mental health, our marriage, and our parenting methods. Instead of getting defensive, we followed the advice Sarah had given us when we'd called her in a panic. We were calm, cooperative, and completely transparent. And we gave her our evidence. We believe this report was filed maliciously, Mark said, his voice steady as he handed her a folder. It's retaliation for a legal dispute we are currently in with my wife's stepmother. Inside the folder was a copy of the probate court filing and a concise, bullet-pointed summary of the situation, carefully prepared by Sarah. We didn't give her the email or the voicemail yet. Sarah wanted to save those for court. We just gave her enough context to show that the anonymous report was anything but. Ms. Miller read the documents, her expression unreadable. She promised a full investigation and left. The moment the door closed behind her, I collapsed into Mark's arms, shaking with a mixture of rage and relief. A week later, we received a letter from CPS. The report was deemed unfounded. The case was closed. But the letter also contained a sentence that made my blood sing with vindication. The investigation suggests the initial report was made with malicious intent and constitutes an abuse of the reporting system. Sarah was ecstatic. This is better than gold, Clara, she said over the phone. She didn't just try to intimidate you, she committed a crime. Filing a false CPS report is illegal. This completely undermines her credibility. She's no longer the grieving widow. She's a malicious actor. The legal battle dragged on for months. It was a grueling process of depositions and discovery. Brenda's lawyers tried to portray me as a cold, calculating woman obsessed with money. They brought up every time I disagreed with my father, every argument, twisting them into evidence of a strained relationship. Brenda's deposition was a masterclass in performance art. She cried, she dabbed her eyes with a tissue, she spoke of her boundless love for my father and her deep concern for her troubled son. She claimed the 401k change was a beautiful, selfless act on my father's part. A deathbed wish to correct the cosmic injustice of my success and Leo's struggles. My deposition was brutal. Their lawyer grilled me for hours, trying to get me to admit I resented Leo, that I was jealous of his relationship with my father, that I felt entitled to the money. I stuck to the facts, my voice never wavering, with Sarah by my side like a guardian angel. The turning point came when Sarah's team subpoenaed Leo's financial records. It was a bloodbath. He was drowning in debt. He had maxed out multiple credit cards, had a lien on his ridiculously expensive car, and was facing eviction from his trendy downtown apartment. He wasn't just struggling, he was on the verge of financial implosion. His desperation was the motive, clear as day. Finally, after nearly a year of skirmishing, our court date arrived. The courtroom was cold and imposing. I sat between Mark and Sarah, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Across the aisle, Brenda sat with Leo, whispering in his ear. She shot me a look of pure hatred. I met her gaze and held it, refusing to be the one to look away. Her lawyer went first, painting a picture of my father's final days, of a man clear-headed and at peace making his final arrangements. He called Brenda to the stand. She delivered an Oscar-worthy performance, weeping as she described my father's supposed anxiety over Leo's future. All he wanted was to know Leo would be okay, she sobbed. He told me, Brenda, Clara is strong, she'll be fine, but Leo needs this. It's the last thing I can do for him. It was sickening to listen to her twist my father's words, his memory, into such a grotesque lie. Then it was Sarah's turn to cross-examine. She was a shark. Mrs. Evans, she began, her voice deceptively gentle. You state that your husband was lucid and of sound mind when he signed this document, correct? Completely, Brenda said, dabbing her eyes. even though his medical records from that day show he was on a dosage of morphine that the attending physician noted caused significant confusion and disorientation. Brenda's face tightened. He had moments of clarity. Moments of clarity, Sarah repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Was one of those moments when he signed this form, a form you just happened to have with you at the hospital? I was helping him get his affairs in order. Sarah then presented the email from my father to his friend George. She had George, a kind, elderly man with honest eyes, read it aloud to the court. As he read my father's words, I'm worried about Brenda trying to pressure me to give more to Leo. She has a blind spot a mile wide. A gasp went through the courtroom. Brenda went pale. Next, Sarah presented the letter from Child Protective Services, detailing their findings that the report against me was malicious. Mrs. Evans, can you tell the court who might have filed a false, anonymous report against your stepdaughter? A report that just happened to coincide with her challenging you in court. I have no idea, Brenda lied, her voice thin, but the damage was done. Her mask of the grieving widow was shattered. The final blow was the voicemail. Sarah played it for the court. My father's weak, slurred voice filled the silent room. Brenda's here, with some papers about the money. She's saying it's for Leo. I don't feel right about it. I told her it's for you. She's not listening. I broke down, sobbing silently into Mark's shoulder. It was my dad, testifying from his grave. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had been watching the proceedings with an eagle eye, had heard enough. When it was time for her to rule, she didn't mince words. She looked directly at Brenda and Leo, her face a mask of contempt. The evidence presented here is overwhelming, she said, her voice ringing with authority. It paints a clear and disturbing picture of a son in financial distress and a mother who engaged in a campaign of manipulation, coercion, and malicious slander to defraud her stepdaughter of her rightful inheritance. She invalidated the beneficiary change, ruling that it was a product of undue influence. The 401k was mine, but she didn't stop there. Furthermore, she continued, her gaze withering, this court is appalled by the blatant and cruel abuse of the Child Protective Services system. It is a tactic so vile, so far beyond the pale of decent human behavior, that it warrants severe sanction. She ordered Brenda and Leo to pay for my entire legal fees, a sum that was well into the six figures. And then, she granted the restraining order we had requested. For 2 years, Brenda and Leo were legally forbidden from contacting me, Mark, or Noah, or coming within 500 feet of our home, my work, or Noah's school. It was over. We had won. It wasn't a joyous, triumphant victory. It was a heavy, somber vindication. As we left the courthouse, I didn't feel elation. I felt a profound, bone-deep sadness for the family I had lost, but also a quiet, powerful sense of peace. The war was finally over. It's been a year now. We haven't heard a word from Brenda or Leo, and the silence has been a balm to my soul. The money from the 401k is sitting in a trust fund for Noah's education, exactly as my dad would have wanted. Sometimes, I feel a pang of sadness when I see a happy, multi-generational family at the park. I grieve for the father I lost twice, once to cancer, and again to the greed of the woman he loved. But that grief is quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I look at Mark, my unwavering partner, who stood by me through the darkest days. I look at Noah, a bright, happy boy who will grow up shielded from the toxicity that almost consumed us. I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up, who protect you, who love you without condition. It's the family you choose, the family you build. Brenda and Leo didn't just lose a court case. They lost any claim they ever had to being a part of mine. I no longer have a stepmother or a half-brother. I have peace. I have my home, my husband, my son. I have my father's memory, which I rescued from the lies they tried to bury it under. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that truly mattered.